and delivered. So I'm moving that around, like landscaping work, you know.
Right. Well, yeah, no, there's a lot to do and everybody's happy to be outside. That's for sure.
Yes, yes, indeed.
A great time. So, I guess the question is here, let me just put the slides up. So I guess the question is, how important is this whole fiscal sustainability, do you think, everyone?
Um, well, I don't know. To me, you know, having been on the board of
Oops,
selectmen,
here, yeah, no, just a second. There, I got the big screen on.
having been on the board of selectmen, I had this distinct feeling, and I think Kerry Kissinger shares my concern, that the town is not. There's sort of two tensions. One tension is, well, it wants to stay the way it is, which is sort
Right.
of a 2-acre zoning and all residential, um, and a lot of conservation land, and hopefully not a lot more development. That the build out, if it happens, you know, okay, that's all right, but as long as it's not doesn't drastically change the, you know, the size
Right.
of the town, right?
Right.
So what that means is that we don't, that the growth that we've had, I guess, has, it's been a kind of a Ponzi scheme in the sense that the new growth has always kind of made the budget possible, but that's, as we get closer and closer to build out and the percentage growth declines, it become we're stressed, but also because as we cross through certain thresholds, like with the police station, if you're over 5,000, I think you need to have a full-fledged police
Right.
station, yada yada yada. So it's like I don't see how you can do how you can square all these constraints.
Well,
And
so the
so,
question and the issue I go back and forth, and obviously you're aware of this, is that we look at sort of the, 2012, 13, the sort of $12,000 taxes, and then we're up around 15. Of course, most of that's driven by the school capital projects, right?
right.
So your point is, and this is a question I sort of pose to all of us, is sort of the relative level of taxes to our median income, the tax incidence,
Hmm.
which has gone up because of those two projects to almost 9%. It's a little under,
Hmm.
which in terms of relative taxation, that was we basically have been in the 6-7% level, except when you go back 30 years when we were a relatively small town. So the question, which is the question I think we all ask, and you were asking, is Carlisle willing to pay beyond that? And what's the level beyond? And again, I do a tax median income, because if we have a certain level of inflation and essentially our salaries go up at inflation level, we can kind of stay even and slowly go down if we don't have more capital projects. If you have more capital projects, then of course then you have the debt problem, and that's kind of the real, that's I think the real conundrum, as you say. We don't have huge amount of growth, which we're not going to unless you change zoning in some dramatic way. So therefore, you don't have increase your real estate taxes. How much more are we able to and willing to take on at the community center or something like that?
Right, right. I mean, you look at other towns, and they have resources like community centers, you know, parks, you know,
Right.
that, you know, are a lot more sophisticated than our parks and things like that. Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing is that could happen is the median income could go up because richer people are moving into
Right.
town, right? You
Right.
have
Exactly.
big mansions, you have tear downs, and so the median income goes up, not because, you know, the United States is getting richer as a whole, but because rich people are moving to Carlisle.
Correct. Correct. And we have 40% of our people living in Carlisle with incomes over $200,000. So a significant portion. And so then the older people are more on fixed incomes, and they're, naturally feeling squeezed out. Or, that's, so you have a, not quite bifurcated, but yes, you're absolutely right. You get this whole distribution issue. And of course, those of us who are older, we should have paid off our debt and be able to do other things, but that may not always be the case.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, no, I
I,
agree with you.
So I don't know what the solution is. I mean, I would say, okay, can we do things more efficiently? Uh, I personally don't believe we need to spend as much on police, as we do. But that's, it wasn't that long ago that Carlisle had like a vestigial police force, and the
Right. Yeah.
state police
In the
covered.
trailer.
Yeah, exactly, in a
Right.
trailer
Yeah.
parked next to the fire station in the
Right.
woods, kind of.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Um, yeah. So, um, you know, but there is this. Well, I think the other dynamic is that the uh, people who sell real estate want to be able to sell a product, i.e., the town of Carlisle,
Right.
and that product looks better if there's better fire protection because there's because then your homeowner's insurance is less,
Right.
and people feel more secure, whatever. But the police is also a big part of that. And then, of course, the school is a big part of that package. So
Correct. Right.
all these things, and I think that the Carlilians of the 60s and 70s were sort of these engineers who lived in deck houses and
Mhm.
maybe didn't really care so much about all that stuff, and were happy
Right.
to move into a small town that had a minimal kind of
Yeah, I mean, as you
infrastructure.
know, I mean, this is obviously Carrie's, point is, can you find savings in the police or some other ways? And because I agree with you, I think we've kind of moved into this 24/7 world of police coverage. Why we need it, but that seemed to be where we are.
Right.
And getting savings when you're people driven is really hard, as you look
Hmm.
at it. My question to Carrie or to in general is if we combine, what do we offer Concord, all right?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah, we
that's
could regionalize the Carlisle school. I just read the select board or the selectmen debating Nathan Brown and Josh, and they both agreed, well, no, we can't touch the Carlisle school in terms of regionalization. We work so hard. I don't really understand, uh, I don't know if that's true. I'm sure they're playing to, what they believe is the larger audience, and therefore, it's probably a consensus in Carlisle, at least amongst a majority. So, maybe that can't change either.
Yeah, and
Um,
I know there have been various studies on regionalization, and again, it becomes down how much you save, and you have to
mhm.
get down to people and what people would not be there, and maybe it's a couple 100,000, you know,
Right.
and so it's and again, the question I say on this is, what do we offer Concord? Why would they
The
want
partner.
us? We
Yeah.
left them in 1805.
Yeah. Yeah. Do they want us back?
Yeah, why would we want them back on us back?
Right.
We
Right.
So I think it's the real challenge is how does that work? I mean, it's great in concept, but how do you regionalize and what do you offer, right?
Right. Well, then I mean, a radical idea is to say, okay, let's have, a very, let's scale back the police force. Let's have maybe only 9 to 5 coverage. But what we're going to do is we're going to put up some cameras, right? And we're going to be able to, maybe a half a dozen is all it's needed. There's only so many different ways to get into Carlisle. Westford
Right.
Street, Concord, 225, East Street, and once you have those covered, um, if anything happens, you can very quickly figure out what's going on. Maybe have one in the center or whatever, and then
Hmm.
you don't have to have this 24/7. And the other, and you all these property checks.
Yeah, right. I mean that
It's like, okay, yeah, you hire a private security company to do your property check
right,
for you.
exactly. Yeah. I mean,
This is
why
not.
should we if you want a property check, pay a fee for it?
Yeah, exactly. That covers the entire cost of doing it, including OPEB and
Hmm.
the whole stack of costs involved with doing that. Or hey, we'll vet some private company that whatever that you can
I mean
hire.
that's the whole risk assessment, which is what you're getting into, and risk
Mm,
assessment, and we can do the statistics, but then is that what people want to do to save, as you say, have only 12-hour police coverage and have it? And we know that, essentially the only time people are going to come in and try to rob your house is from, 4 in the afternoon to 8, because after 8, once it's dark, then it becomes grand larceny. And, so there's a different, any,
mm.
So I don't
Hmm.
know. I mean, that's an
Hmm.
interesting question, but I don't,
Yeah.
somehow I suspect that it's going to be a tough one to sell.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's tough, and then, you talk about efficiency with the school. You know, there are all kinds of ideas around, online learning and the upside down classroom where the kids are, they don't do homework, but they take lessons, online,
Yeah.
canned stuff, and then they go to school where they get individual attention to help them do the homework around what they've, learned, so that the kids who kind of just get it by watching,
Yeah,
are
no,
fine.
I
And
mean, I've been involved in online learning a good deal at Brandeis, and certainly the
mhm,
people that tell me it's not a cost savings. It may be an effective way of learning,
mhm,
but to make it effective as a teaching thing, you really don't want any teachers or facilitators more than 20. So you still have the
mhm,
same class size. And
mm.
could you pay the facilitators less? We do in certain online situations, but I suspect not in a union environment with a teaching.
Right, right, for sure, for sure.
So I think that, yeah, right. I mean, I think that clearly something's going to happen on that in terms of education, much more of a model.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Was
so
you,
I don't know what do you think is the likeliest sort of scenario going forward? Let's
what,
say fast forward, 20, 30 years.
well, I think, as you know, I mean, we're a real estate value based economy here, and you
Mhm,
basically say what's going to be how many houses are going to be here, and therefore what level of revenue is that going to generate, and we can kind of project that out, and then say what type of zoning that is. I've been going back and forth with Carrie. You might add, you know, 200 to 400 more houses without sorts of dramatic changes in zoning. That adds some additional revenue, but then essentially, and that kind of gets you to a sustainable level.
mhm.
Um, in 20 years, so maybe we're 6,000, 6,400 or something. You don't need a new school, and then you're just kind of going along at a cost of inflation, um,
Do you,
and then there's a slow payment of the debt.
mhm. Well, these debt sort of, there are these bursts, right?
Right,
As a building fails,
right.
and you have to rebuild it. Um, so yeah. So you're saying that we can add 200 to 400 more single family homes, and then have
Then it's
no
kind of we're
growth.
at a build out. I mean,
Yeah.
again, you can maybe you do some cluster homes and things like that. And you look at, but that's only what 20% increase in the housing stock, right?
Hmm.
Essentially,
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
over its 20-year period, and then you get a certain revenue from that, and that's essentially your base revenue is. And I think that's what you need to think about. I mean, I'd be surprised if we're going to want dramatic changes.
Mm. Do we know of any town that has achieved this sort of steady state, um, for at least, let's say, 20 years, where the number of housing units is flat and they are the size of Carlisle?
I don't. I'm sure there
5,000
is.
people,
I don't
or
know. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Um,
I think also the other dilemma there is just the family dynamics and what the
mhm.
fertility is going to be, and
Mm,
are more people going to be moving to the suburbs because of COVID and schools, and are we going to have a change in that? And we know the families are generally getting smaller. So
right.
and so, I mean, the problem is Massachusetts has a huge housing, much
Hmm.
too expensive.
Right.
Or else.
Right.
So, and that's not an easy one to solve, right?
Right. But it might be interesting to look at, the 200 and whatever it is, 51 or 91 communities in Massachusetts, and say, are there any that are at a steady state point at this 5,000
Yeah, right,
population?
right. And
Um,
there are probably only 30 at most 30 communities in the in the 5 to 7,000.
right.
Yeah,
And so actually you could sort of do a histogram,
right.
and say and it might be that there's this sort of valley between the really small towns that are steady state, and then the Billricas and the
Right.
Chelmsfords, and that some towns manage to to cross that valley of death.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's an interesting one. I mean, I know Kerry kind of goes on the economies of scale issue, but I just don't see us getting to the 8,000 size,
Hmm.
easily. And so what can you, so yeah, that's a sustainability question. It's a very interesting question. And I haven't kind of worked the numbers, as you know, I kind of look at the school population. That kind of drives, the cost, most of the cost
Right.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, but that fertility question, that's really interesting. I mean, I've been reading a lot about, well, China, they just,
Nope. Hi there.
Got here, John.
All right.
Hi.
All right. So Don, I wanted to just share the slide on fiscal sustainability that we put together, and sort of point out, this is the period, sort of before the schools, when the average taxes were around $12,000. When we added the new capital projects for the schools, which we knew was going to cost money. Basically, over the past 4 or 5 years, they've gone up considerably to the $15,000 level. So essentially, we've had a 25% increase in taxes over the past 7 or 8 years, primarily tied to the 2 school projects, which the high school and so essentially the tax rate relative to the median income in Carlisle went from about 6%, a little bit over 6%, to a little bit under 9%, and now it's leveled off, and basically it's a little under 9%, and we're sort of growing at the rate of inflation. And as you saw in the budget that was passed this year, there was a slight increase. We used some of the monies from free cash to pay for one-time items, but that's kind of where we're at. So the real challenge going forward, as you increase capital projects, which therefore has a debt amortization tied to it, how does that tie into the decline in our debt payments for the school? And so that's a question of kind of matching, the payment off of our existing debt and adding new debt for new projects, whether it be police and fire, expansion of town offices, community center, all these other things. So that's the challenge from a fiscal standpoint. And the question that Claude and I were discussing just in our own chat was, is there a sustainable level that Carlisle can be to fund its services and add some things incrementally, but not have an increase in the relative taxation? The challenge for those of us who are a little bit older and seem to be aging for some reason is that our incomes may not be growing, whereas we get a whole group of newer families moving in who are basically in the 200,000 and above level. So those are the challenges that we face. And I think Claude's question about, is there a sustainable level that Carlisle and communities can have that kind of maintains the level of services that we have, and can go forward.
John, isn't there one other caveat that I think Carrie's pointed this out, but by I feel like it's 5 years from now, the debt for the school is going to be retired. So there is this period where that kind of falls
it drops
off.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. No, and absolutely. That's why essentially, if you look out 10 years, it looks like the town could afford 20 million in new capital expenditures and have more or less the same level of taxation relative to income. Now, of course, there's a distribution in income, and some people have more income than others, but that's absolutely right. So there is a capital planning process.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of the broad picture. And what Claude and I were talking about, you can add probably 200 to 400 additional housing units over some period of time, which is about 25% increase in housing, which increases the tax base, and then you kind of built yourself out. And again, that without dramatic zoning change. But again, that's that's kind of where we're at. Those are the challenges, and they're not simple. But this is the challenge of a lot of communities, and this.
Well,
And,
Don joined in.
right, right,
Sounded
Don.
like you and Claude started the conversation. Don, do you want to explain what it is that drew you into this discussion?
It's the topic that I knew the least about.
Okay,
So I didn't come with lots to add to the conversation, but I am learning. And John, thank you for your explanation just now. That was very helpful.
great.
By you said then we would be built out. Do you mean that all the available space would have had housing built on it?
More or less, and this is a thing that we're trying to get our arms around in terms of making sure we have all the parcels, cataloged and have some sense of which parcels are buildable or not. And of course, that's still a judgment call because we don't know what the septic is. So with the existing septic and water, we're trying to say how many parcels, what's the capacity that the Carlisle could handle. And again, the estimates are between 200 and 400. And there's some minor zoning changes, but not dramatic. And there might be some clusters zoning, which obviously it sounds like you're talking about in other groups. But that's kind of where it's at. And, there's another issue about family size and, what's happening with the overall demographics with the whole state and who moves to Carlisle and, the population of the school. So there are a bunch of things that are, you have to play with and look at, but that's
What is Carrie's statistic, John, on, I think it's been an average of 10 per year. It's not a huge amount.
well, well, having looked at this more carefully for over 30 years, we had a big growth period in the 70s and 80s, and then really since 2000, it's dropped way off. And so
Right.
yes, it's about 10 new houses and per year, and and I kind of focus on the school population. More than half the school population comes from people moving in and turnover houses, not new houses. So people move in and buy an $800,000 home, have one child, and then have one child in their year.
Right. So 200 to 400 is over, Don, an extended period of time if it's likely to follow the patterns
Correct.
that have had. But, one of the things that the master plan wrestles with is, if there was a change in the zoning in some fashion, or there was a desire in that one graphic to try to promote converting some of the one-family housing into multifamily housing, which people can do by right. So it's something that is an ongoing process. Would that change the dynamic? That's the by right ability to, and it doesn't get much use to expand a property into a two-family.
For a house that's built before 1962.
Correct.
And I don't know if anybody's looked at this, but I've thought about it. I know I've certainly done this in our house, which was designed as a single family house. You say, how would you convert it to a two-family house? Well, you have to have bathroom, you have to have kitchen, different ventilation is actually somewhat involved, and converting it at a reasonable cost is not that easy. And so that's
Right.
that's one of the issues. The one that was converted on East Street, if you look at that, it's really two houses with a connecting garage. So it's, so that becomes the sort of issue. If you change that zoning, what kind of increase would you get? Not obvious.
Right.
And, Jack knows the real estate business, and, building a two-family or four-family, you kind of design it beforehand, not after the fact.
Yeah, certainly makes it challenging, and probably question too whether there's a demand. A lot of the people who move into Carlisle, they may have come from an area with more dense population. They're attracted to the open space, and do they want to, have their own plot of land, so to speak, and not be in a two-family scenario? That's another question.
But and certainly go back to the fiscal sustainability, since most of the costs in town are driven by, salaries, right? 70%. there's the debt load. And so the debt load is one you can manage, but you're going to say if you're going to have a rate of increase around inflation, then that kind of means your tax rate is more or less going to go up around inflation. There's not a lot of easy use. And since clearly we're not going to have marijuana growing here that we can tax, we don't have a way to bring in other revenues easily.
What about the issue, though, of businesses?
Businesses are taxed on the value of the real estate. You do not tax their revenue.
And we don't have a commercial rate in Carlisle, nor would we, I believe, even by the state statute, qualify. But you raise an interesting point, Don. There are a couple of small commercial zones that could be potentially enhanced. I don't think it would necessarily generate a huge amount of additional revenue, but the question that we heard from these early parts of the program, this isn't really a fiscal sustainability, I think I'm sort of moving from, is that a lot of people would like to see some more commercial opportunities, in the town, whether it's a gathering place or, some kind of a restaurant, that was pointed out, I think, in one of the sessions. And how does that potentially evolve? But there, it is not something that's likely to change much in Carlisle, as it has had a huge impact in places like Acton and Bedford, and even Concord to some degree.
Right, and if you look at Concord, there's a lot of commercial real estate, and you've got Route 2, and you've got the Concord Center and West Concord, and so you've got that value of commercial real estate, which you can tax at a different rate. We don't have that, and not one, we don't have the zoning, but two, would someone come in and put a big strip mall here that we could tax at a higher level? Not clear.
And I'm not pushing for that.
No, I know, of course
But
not.
I think it's an issue that ought to be discussed.
Right.
I think one of the disadvantages that Carlisle has is, nobody wants to put, a lot of towns will have like a commercial area that is right off of a major interstate or major state highway, like Route 3. Look at Billerica. You go down Trouble Cove Road, and there's a new warehouse there that just got put up. There's the medical imaging, radioactive imaging place. You've got the jail, and then you've got this huge industrial park.
Right.
And commercial real estate kind of wants to have easy access. They want to be able to get to places fast, right? Carlisle is like the last place you want to be if you want to get someplace fast, Right. So I think Carlisle has a built-in disadvantage just because of its geography.
Right.
Well, and it's interesting, in the original master plan, not original, there have been two, I guess, but the one that goes back to 1960, which was before my time, one of the things that was discussed was a bypass around the town center, if you will, right, that would have, to your point, Claude, created, if you will, an ability to allow for some retail and other things. And the town, pretty much in keeping with the character argument, I think pushed that aside. There were some other environmental and other issues. I think some of it was going to have to.
Well, also the pipeline. They want to make
right,
sure the pipeline didn't go through town, but comes through our property. So
Right.
Right.
So.
But that's the sort of path dependency issue. Once you set your two acre zoning and decided that we're going to become this sort of rural town, it's very hard to unmake that unless you do it dramatically, because other towns have developed in other ways.
But I think the interesting thing that I come back to is that, you take something like the farm stand, which was the Daylilies, which arguably was a business. But I think there are opportunities to grow some amenities in Carlisle, but I'm afraid it's unlikely to generate a big rateable for the town. It's going to be
right,
more of an amenity than it is a rateable. I mean, the only commercial ratables that we have that are substantial in the town and it constitutes what, John? Less than like 3 or 4%,
Right.
is the pipeline, which a lot of people don't know about, the
Insurance technology.
assurance technology.
Eversource pays a bunch of money for its physical plant,
Right.
and presumably Verizon and Comcast too. I don't know, but that shows up as a big, their the value. If you look at the real estate thing, it's like in the millions of dollars. I mean, it's not a huge source of revenue, but it's there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you look at the insurance technology, if for some reason we go more remote, and insurance technology is a big business, even if you double the size of it, you're not going to get much revenue out of it. So that's the real dilemma. We don't have much commercially zoned areas that could really generate
Unless
revenue.
we added it in some way,
Right. Right.
But, and then Bates Farm is technically
Right.
has the commercial zoning.
Yeah, you could add $1 for every calorie you consume, right? So that's, I think, but that's really the dilemma. We're a real estate-based tax town. We're a residential town, and upper middle class town. That's probably where we're going to stay. And so, therefore, how do you manage within those boundaries? And people are happy here.
I think that this isn't the group that's supposed to be discussing this, but I'm a little embarrassed that I live in a town that is so white. I like white people, but I would like to have our town be more diverse, and I'm afraid that means I'm afraid in order to have that, we would have to have housing be more affordable. And that might mean some of these forms of housing that I don't know the names of, but
it's 40Bs,
yeah, kind of thing.
Well, we are getting more diverse in terms of, Asians and I guess Asians and other groups moving in who have come kind of from high tech. But and it's interesting, Concord is getting more diverse for African Americans because, and this is kind of one of the terrible ironies, when you look at Concord's population, they count the prison in their census. And so it's seen as having an African American population, which it does. It's just they don't let them out.
Well,
But people are moving there.
When you're doing a master plan, and we've seen this in other communities where you have a large group quarters setting, such as a prison, it's as much as possible, it's ideal to look at household data instead of population data, because unless they do happen to mirror each other, but there is often, if you have a large prison population, it's going to skew.
Right. But a number of more African Americans are moving into Concord, partly because of that. That's what's been happening on the real estate.
You mean they don't understand?
But that's not us.
They don't. You mean they don't understand that the only way
I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I just heard this as anecdotally, and I don't have.
No, I think what you're saying is accurate, but I think what Don is saying is important, which is something that the master plan has been really trying to figure out, is you will likely bring in more diversity if you have more diverse housing types. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have, a large apartment building that's, federal housing. You can do it by just basically creating some smaller kinds of units. But the challenge with the way that Carlisle is zoned is and John knows this is sort of the wrestling point, is when you say you have to have 2-acre zoning, then every 2-acre parcel, is worth $500,000. And then it makes it very difficult for somebody to come in and say, I'm going to take that, parcel and create something that isn't a large as Carrie pointed out, I think in the last session, the average size house in Carlisle over the last 10 years is 5,000 square feet.
Yeah, and I think one of the other issues is, you know, if you do the numbers, if you look at the cost of construction, let's say it's $300 per square foot, even if you divided it in 4 houses into a 2-acre unit, which could handle a certain number of bedrooms, you're still going to have a house price that's going to be over 500,000, right? And that's the challenge from a building standpoint, is that it costs money to build, and that's the dilemma that we're in this current real estate market. Is very tough to build something that's under 500,000-600,000.
But Don's point is, and we've heard it from many people, Don. So I appreciate you making that point. It's something to wrestle with for sure.
Right.
What I heard from developers, of multi-unit housing is that economically in Massachusetts.
Hello there. So let me just share the slide on fiscal sustainability that was there, but just sort of talk what the issues are, and then we can talk about them. Here, basically, before the school projects went forward, we were at about $12,000 of average taxes per household. And then basically we jumped to, over this seven-year period, to about a little bit over 15,000. So we've had a 25% increase in the average tax bill over this period, which we knew was going to happen because of the 2 school projects, because of the high school, which is magnificent in what they built, and also in the Carlisle Public School. So that has been the main issue that has driven the increase in taxes. It's the increased level of debt service that we have sustained, and that will be coming down over the next 20 years. And it is starting to slowly come down. And so, but that means that the average tax rate to the median income in Carlisle has basically gone from a little over 6% to almost 9%. So there's been a significant increases in the tax incidence of what people have to pay in taxes for living in Carlisle. The level of taxes that we pay is comparable to Lincoln, comparable to Concord, comparable to Dover. We're in the top 5 in terms of taxes, but that is in terms of what we are as a community, and that's where we are. Going forward, that's going to come down, but, and this is the real challenge, is there are a lot of facility needs, and we know about the police and fire. We know there's a desire for a community center. There's a need to expand some of the offices and have more space in in municipal offices, and also maybe space for COA. So that's the sort of issue, is what we're wrestling with, is how to sort of balance these needs and wants that we have going forward, and also keep our taxes in a way that are sort of growing commensurate with our incomes. Now, obviously, some people's incomes are growing faster than others, and so that there's a disproportionate effect depending upon your age and to the extent that you pay down debt, or you've got children in school. So that's kind of where we're at. And then we're at this point is, how do we balance this going forward, and how do we plan for the future? So that's sort of broadly speaking, what the issues are. So let's just go around, and Christina, Ann with the E, and then Ann without the E. Just if you want to sort of talk some of your concerns and issues.
Somebody else start. I joined late. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. No.
So I have a question for you, John.
Yes.
Ann's
my wife, so just so you know.
So have you done a forecast, an annual forecast, to show what the capacity will be for adding new projects for different scenarios based on the pay down of the school
Yes.
project?
Yeah, we have, and Carrie Kissinger and I, and with our financial director, have got a base model, and essentially the town can, over the next 10 to 15 years, take on another 15 to $20 million of debt. And as the school debt gets paid down, and depending what your debt service is, and remain at the same relative tax level. And by mean that, average taxes to income.
Okay,
Our
so
taxes
the
will
nine,
go
the
up from
9%.
the 9%, a little under 9%. So our average taxes will go up from 15,000 to 19,000, but income in general and income in the country will go up on average. Obviously, some people's income will not go up, so that it creates pressure for people who are on fixed income. But that is sort of the dynamic, and this is, and again, this is a question that we don't know, but between 8 and 9% is kind of the highest relative level of taxes that Carlisle's been willing to support. We don't know if that's what it'll be going forward. That's yes. We have those numbers. We've done them. We haven't kind of worked in the amount of new growth that would fit in that. We have some assumptions, which is the existing level. It could be a little bit more, but it's not going to be a lot.
I have two questions for you, John. I was just talking to someone at a barbecue last night, talking about their company that has offices all over the country, and they're scaling back their real estate to only 10% of what they had pre-pandemic because people are going to work from home.
Right.
So instead of like building or obtaining new office space for our employees, wouldn't it make sense to try to figure out if there's to take the lessons learned from the pandemic and have people office share or have a hybrid schedule? So that's one question. I hope you guys consider that and thinking about facilities needs for office space at least.
Mhm.
And then my second question was, one of your goals is, I can't remember exactly what it said, but reuse town buildings or have
Mhm.
productive uses. Is there anything besides the Highland building? And if not, shouldn't we just say, figure out what to do with the Highland building?
It's also the Bog House is in that
Yeah, even though the
category.
Bog House lease, it includes the farmers helpers on that, but yes.
But that's one of the properties. And then I suppose, Madeline, it could be any other combination, as John and I have said about this, of the existing police building and existing fire building, if that becomes another use, right? So it's sort of like this
This big puzzle, right?
right puzzle of different properties. And the town hall, the question is it sufficient right now? And you raise a great point, which is, under pre-pandemic situation, there may not have been enough space at town hall, but now question whether remote work could change that. And that's something that I think should be explored.
I mean, you raise a sort of fascinating question, sort of broadly speaking, is, as you know, there's been a tremendous concentration of people working and living in the Boston area, which has driven up the rents there. But clearly, as real estate becomes more dispersed, you might get the whole development of the 495 area, and so you get a much more decentralized housing situation, and that definitely seems to be the trend. We're not sure how long that's going to be and what the implications are in terms of travel and in terms of work. But people still need to live someplace, and Carlisle is certainly one of the places to live and maybe work remotely.
And Madeline, one thing that I've been following outside of Carlisle is there's a lot of conversion of traditional office buildings in places like Waltham that are now being converted over to lab space because developers see it as a more economical use of their space. They're probably concerned about the office space, but it'll be interesting to see how that changes the dynamic, because those are facilities that would require occupancy, full occupancy, but less parking spaces per thousand. So that's something that's going on. A lot of people in the real estate community are talking about that and how that'll affect commuters from Carlisle. TBD.
Other Ann Gibbs, you have thoughts, questions?
I don't right now. I'm just listening in to others.
So I think I know this came up earlier, and it was kind of in the Beacon Village discussion. is the whole aging in place, and how do we have more housing options that are in a range that people can afford? And obviously people look at Malcolm Village as the area, that one area that's been successful, right? And they were originally, when they came on the market, it was 200,000, and now they're about 500,000. And so the question is, can you find other ways to do that, to build 30, 40 units that is not under necessarily the senior housing restrictions, which is what Malcolm Meadows was building, but it has a little bit more flexibility. So those are certainly questions worth thinking about. And we were in, yes.
Oh no, I was going to reply to that, but I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, absolutely, please do.
So I feel like the Woodward construction that's happening now, although the town gained the conservation land, and I should state, I come first and foremost preserve the environment. That's where I'm coming from. But I feel that in a way there was a missed opportunity there, because all the structures going in there are market value or close to, and also the subdivision, if you can call it that, on West Street and Acton Street, although done very thoughtfully and sort of visually, it won't have as big of an impact. But again, that's land that got subdivided, wasn't preserved environmentally. Construction's happening again with really large houses, and is there some way that we, if that's going to happen, can the town tap into that and say, well, wait a second, if this is going to happen, then X percentage, I mean, this is off the top of my head, I don't know, but a certain percentage needs to go towards less expensive housing, so, or a variety of housing, as opposed to having all of just more McMansions and more McMansions coming in. And, we have still a few left of these smaller capes that, they get raised and another McMansion goes up. And is there some way to tap into preserving those smaller structures?
Madeline can probably answer this from a zoning standpoint, and I know people try to do this, but putting restrictions on what can be built on a house is very hard and gets challenged legally.
Yeah.
In general, you're talking about people's private property, and when someone owned those properties that were developed for Woodward and on West and Acton streets, and someone has to give up the value, whether it's the seller or the developer, or if the town wants to actually put money in, there is something called, and I'm so far from an expert on this, inclusionary zoning, where if you're building a 20-house subdivision, one house has to be made affordable. But as you can see from the numbers, we don't have too many places left to put a 20-house subdivision, and it would maybe gain one house. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It should probably be looked at.
Yeah, no, and there was an economist at the turn of the century who basically said, actually, a lot of our house value is a public good, and we should be taxing it that way. Henry George didn't get very far. People went to private. But I think the other issue that you raise about developments was, you have to understand, both over on Acton Street and the Woodward, and that was a transaction that was put together privately and then brought to the town, and that's the Carlisle Conservation Foundation.
Yeah. It's just frustrating, because it's like, well, something could have if hands weren't tied.
Well, and Gainsborough did something very different in Concord, with a lower price. I mean, one thing I will say about Woodward Village that does differ from the property in the Valentine, area, is those footprints are much smaller. But to your point, Christina, it's not like they're going for anything less than $800,000 or $900,000. So it's not bargain housing, but it is a smaller footprint.
Yeah.
And Jack, as a real estate developer, knows is the issue is in terms of profit. You can look at profit margin, or you can look at actually dollars. But a profit of 10% on a $400,000 house is $40,000. It's very easily to have the $40,000 disappear. 10% on an $800,000 house, it's $800,000 or $1 million, and so or $100,000. So, developers know the numbers pretty well, and they know, where they want to go in sort of protecting themselves. And so that's the real challenge, is how do you make it with using the market to have incentives to build housing at that level without having it being a big development.
Right.
Well, I think, one of the issues which was discussed in one of the other breakout sessions is that we have some mechanisms in Carlisle to increase housing options, but they're full of restrictions. So for example, if you have a large house, but it was built after 1962, by right, you can't turn it into, a duplex, I guess that's called a duplex, but, a two-family. So why arbitrarily 1962, right?
Right.
Because obviously the town's not interested in expanding two-family housing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a 1962 restriction. So I think that's the other thing, is that when we look at all of our zoning bylaws and really dissect them, they are designed to prevent development in Carlisle.
I wouldn't say
just-
prevent, but they're certainly designed to limit.
And discourage
Well,
That's right.
and limit.
I just need to respond to that. I'm on
Yeah.
the planning board. The reason for the 1962 cutoff, zoning laws came in at that point, and they didn't apply retroactively to houses that were already in existence. It wasn't like someone said, how can we make this hard? Let's just find the oldest houses and it won't apply. It was like a form of grandfathering. And
Right, but it has not been revisited, it's just.
It changed
hasn't
the year,
been-
the cutoff year to 2000.
It hasn't changed, right? It hasn't been revised since 1962. So I'm just saying what you're left with when you look at our zoning bylaws is you're left with the impression, which I don't think is inaccurate, that we are really not interested in encouraging development in the town. We're really interested in discouraging it. And we do it very effectively in a wide variety of ways. And I think that's because the development of the town is inconsistent with the other value that we share, which is more powerful, and that is the preservation of the town, the way it looks, and the amount of open space, and so on. So we have this is in conflict, is what I see. And what dominates is preserving the town the way it looks and feels. And that is what succeeds, I guess.
Well, and that certainly comes out in the surveys, this recent one and the one we go back 2009, it's open space in schools are the predominant values.
Yeah.
And I agree with you completely on that. I've thought that a long time. Yes.
Yeah. So it's tough. I think
But
that's.
and you raise a good point, which is and Madeline, spoke to the facts, which is they created a new zoning law in 1962, the last time they did a master plan, or not the last time, but the time before that. But nobody has been exploring, any alternative scenarios. And maybe that's what the master plan has to talk about is there some way to make preservation of open space and housing diversity compatible instead of incompatible? And that's a bit of a challenging question, but we should take it up.
But does that get in general to diversity in the town, period? And how much people want that or don't want that?
Yeah, no, that's a good point that's been brought up certainly in other sessions I've had, is diversity of housing or diversity of the population living here, which by income levels. And my sense is we're still going to remain an upper middle class town, and you're going to have professionals moving in here that can sort of afford it. But, that's kind of what Carlisle is. And it's very hard to change the economics of that easily.
Yeah. No, I agree. Go ahead, Christina.
I don't know. I was going to say something that might be a little controversial, but I'm a firm believer that the more time passes, Carlisle's open space is going to become more and more valuable. And I think it's going to help with okay, so I'm going to sound elitist, and I really don't mean to be, because I think we do need diversity, economic and cultural. So please don't get me wrong, but property values, I think, are going to increase. Quality of life is going to increase. People in surrounding towns are going to get more benefit from Carlisle's open spaces as the surrounding towns get more densified, more crowded. And so I think, as in general, we're losing more and more of nature, of the environment. I think the more that we preserve in town is going to become increasingly important and increasingly valuable.
And I think some of the issues that you're talking about are beyond Carlisle, which is the
Yeah,
housing
no.
crisis. And
Yeah.
no, that's really important to understand, because the state also has to figure out ways to address this, because housing costs is a huge issue, because that's how you attract and keep people here. You have a real problem of out-migration, and it's not going to remain a vital state and a vital area unless we can find ways to keep people here and to live in communities, as you say. And you're absolutely right about the value of land and space.
But you raise an interesting point, Christina, which is, over time, is the open space in Carlisle going to become, in my mind, I mean, we do have these large parcels, and there's sort of been this activity, as John pointed out, between not